Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. What I'm going to present today is not so much a detailed after action report or any kind of heavy duty analysis because I've already touched on those before with my videos for the excellent wing leader Victories 1940 to 1942. What I want to do today is really just introduce you to what's rapidly becoming my favorite scenario in the entire scenario book for this game. And of course, it is, if I can show you here, Cactus Thorns, simulating the defense of Henderson Field with the US Marines and US Navy pilots fending off Japanese attacks right at the outset of the Guadalcanal campaign. I have played this scenario. I think it's my fourth time at the moment. As you can see, I'm right in the middle of it. I'm just going to zoom out a bit so you can get a broad overview of the situation. So there is Henderson Airfield down there with some heavy flak protecting it. And closer to the left side of the board, we have the main Japanese strike force at high altitude, three squadrons of Bettys and some escorting Zeros. And there was another Zero squadron on a sweeping mission up ahead. Now, despite the warnings from coast watchers, I'm afraid the US aircraft had to scramble and they've been caught trying to gain height. The scenario does set them significantly lower down the altitude band than the Japanese. And I decided to freeze it at what's become the dramatic point in the scenario where the two sides have finally sighted each other. The Japanese sweeping squadron is actually turning round to engage the US fighters that it's seen. In the meantime, because they have tactical flexibility, one of the Japanese squadrons actually split into its component flights. So one flight is going to stay with the bombers in the escort role, and the other has dived to meet the oncoming American aircraft and has actually engaged them in a dogfight. So there's been an initial shootout. 1-0 has fallen out the sky, and one of the Wildcats is straggling away with smoke pouring from its engine. So the usual dramatic storytelling is happening. But enough of that. Why do I find this scenario so good? There's a few reasons for it. I'll give you a clearer view of what's happening and just sort of focus in on the action a bit so you can see the counters clearly. I like it because on the surface it's quite an asymmetric action. The Japanese have the advantage of more aircraft, but half of those are bombers who need to be guarded and shepherded. Um, the Japanese air strength, they don't have that many counters. They only start with the three. But each of the counters they start with are full squadrons of Zeros. The US starts with six fighter counters, but they all begin in constituent flights. So they can't combine into the necessary strength that you need to take on the Zeros head on. And in any case, that's not really their mission. Their job is to keep the bombers off Henderson Field. Now, another wrinkle that I like about this scenario is that it's not procedure heavy. The Japanese do have to follow the bombing rules, but they don't actually conduct a bombing attack. So there's none of the rolling for bomb accuracy or any of that. The Japanese simply score points for getting over the airfield with their bomber formations intact, and they drop their bombs and go away, and they get 3 victory points if they do that with reasonably cohesive bomber squadrons. And I like that because, and I understand the reason for it. If they were forcing players to play through the historical narrative of this campaign, the Japanese discovered after a few attempts that high level bombing really wasn't that great for knocking out Henderson Field. They persisted with the tactic for a long time, but it was very much a diminishing return. If players were made to roll for it, the Japanese player would suffer on points. Another important thing that's modelled in this scenario is the lack of Japanese radios. The scenario background actually says, it specifies that the Zeros lacked radios and were punished for it. This is very true on the Japanese side. The US fighters are all linked on the same radio net, which is a huge advantage for them. The Japanese have no such benefits, although they have a slightly greater density of veteran pilots per squadron. It's impossible for two squadrons to warn each other easily. And in this scenario, the one I'm playing, two-thirds of the Japanese force have sighted the US planes and are beginning to do something about it. But there's still that large group of Zeros up there, a complete squadron, which is still not joining in. So, tense moments for the Japanese player because he really needs to get all of those planes into play if he wants to stop the Americans. Now, the Americans have a difficult decision for their part because they're having to climb to intercept the bombers, but climbing makes them vulnerable to diving attacks by the Japanese Zeros. And the tough question for them is, do they try and adopt a safer approach to intercepting the bombers, which means allowing them to conduct their bombing run, or do they try and hit them as soon as possible to break up their formation? Because remember, if those bombers pass over the Henderson Field column, which is roughly there, just off my camera, hang on, that there, that's it. If they pass over the Henderson Field column and drop their bomb, that is 3 victory points automatic per squadron. So there's pressure on the US to do something. Now, my love of this scenario doesn't end there because it pits two of my favourite fighters against each other. And one of the things I love about this game is how well it models the performance of the different fighters. So you can see at the different altitude bands, reversing the often misunderstood relationship between speed and maneuverability, as you can see, there's not too much to choose between the speed of the contending fighters. But the Japanese have a decided advantage in turning fights. Conversely, their firepower is somewhat reduced. So despite the two 20mm cannons and the twin 7.7s in the nose, on balance, that's not that great an armament, especially as the Zero didn't have that many shots for its 20mm cannon, so they had to be quite careful about how they did this. The Grummans, with their decent number of 50 cals, get a better firepower rating, and of course their rugged aircraft have a bigger protection factor, and it shows. So at the beginning of the scenario, the Japanese flight, which dived on its American counterparts, they had all the advantages and mutual hits were inflicted. But of course, while one wounded US aircraft staggers off, the Japanese one who got unlucky is a complete write-off. So that head-on attack was tactically sound, but unfortunately didn't work out so well for the Japanese player. Then again, the fact that it was a veteran Japanese flight had a lot to do with that flight not losing its cohesion, whereas the US flight is disrupted. So the Japanese have been able to force them into a dogfight and keep them away from the bombers. Good play. So there were just a couple of things I've brought up as to why I think this scenario is really good. It does require you to be a bit more experienced with this game because it's not the simplest of the scenarios, but it is a good one. The only thing that's absent is the naval element, and the naval missions in this game can be fun, but I would say for sheer balance in terms of playability, accurate modelling of asymmetric opposing forces who have both their strengths and weaknesses and feel very different when you play them. Excuse me. This is an excellent scenario to play. And I would suggest that if you are new to this game, you've just got your handle on the rules and maybe even the advanced rules, and you want to give a fun scenario a try, then Cactus Thorns is the one to go for. So I hope that that's helped you pick a scenario, one of the many excellent scenarios there are in this book. In addition to the fighters, of course, you're flying the bombers. I still can't get over the lovely presentation and artwork on these. But just out of interest, what is your favourite scenario and why? If you'd like to comment, please do say. You might even convince me there's a better scenario in this book. I'd love to know which ones you enjoy the most. Which ones do you find best for teaching new players? That's another consideration. It would be awesome to hear from you. But as always, I'm going to sign off now with a huge thanks for your company. Hope you've enjoyed this video and much appreciate you visiting the channel. Bye.